It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of the year, my granddaughter Lily's 7th birthday. The backyard of my modest Maplewood home was transformed into a pastel wonderland with pink and purple balloons dancing in the gentle Oregon breeze. Children's laughter floated through the air like music, mingling with the scent of fresh-baked cupcakes and the sweet promise of childhood memories in the making. I was in the kitchen, carefully icing the last batch of vanilla cupcakes with Lily's favorite lavender frosting, when I realized we'd forgotten something crucial: the helium balloons for the party table centerpiece. Lily had been talking about them for weeks, how they would float like magic clouds above her special chair. "Daniel," I called out to my son, who was arranging party favors on the patio table. "We forgot the helium balloons for Lily's chair." He looked up, his face momentarily clouded with frustration, before smoothing into that placating smile I'd grown so accustomed to over the years. "Mom, seriously? We've got a yard full of balloons already." I wiped my hands on my apron. "I promised her, Daniel. You know how much she's been looking forward to it." He sighed, that familiar sound that always made me feel like I was being unreasonable, even when I wasn't. "Fine, I'll run down to Pearson's toy store. They should have some." "Thank you, sweetheart." I reached for my purse. "Here, let me give you some money." Daniel waved me off. "I've got it, Mom. Save your money." He kissed my cheek, his expression softening. "Be back in 20 minutes, tops." I watched him go, feeling that familiar mixture of love and something else. Something I couldn't quite name but had been growing stronger over the past year. Something that made my stomach tighten when he spoke about money. 45 minutes later, the party was in full swing, and Daniel still hadn't returned. Emily, my daughter-in-law, kept checking her watch, her crimson lips pressed into a thin line. "Where is he?" she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear over the Disney soundtrack playing from the portable speaker. "I'm sure he'll be back any minute," I assured her, though uncertainty had begun to gnaw at me. It was only a 10-minute drive to downtown. That's when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, stepping away from the noise of the party. "Mrs. Carter?" A man's voice, unfamiliar, low, and tight with what sounded like tension. "Yes, this is Evelyn Carter." "Ma'am, I'm Eli Peterson. I work at Pearson's toy store. He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "I know this is strange, but I think you need to come here. It's about your son." My heart stuttered. "Is Daniel okay? Has there been an accident?" No, nothing like that," he assured me quickly. "He's fine physically, but please just come. Come quietly. Don't tell anyone where you're going if you can help it." I glanced back at the party, at Emily supervising a game of musical chairs, at Lily's bright face flushed with excitement. "I don't understand." "Please, Mrs. Carter. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." Something in his voice, an urgency, sincerity, made me trust him. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I made a hasty excuse to Emily about needing to pick up more ice, slipped into my car, and drove downtown with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles blanched white. Pearson's toy store was a Maplewood institution, a family-owned business that had survived the big box invasion through sheer charm and community. Loyalty. The bell over the door jingled cheerfully as I entered, a sound at odds with the knot of dread in my stomach. A young man with kind eyes and a name tag reading Eli was waiting near the register. He was perhaps 30, with dark-rimmed glasses and a nervous energy that made him shift his weight from foot to foot. When he saw me, relief washed over his face. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming." "What's going on?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Where's Daniel?" Eli glanced toward the back of the store, then took my arm gently, leading me between aisles of stuffed animals and building blocks until we were hidden in the science kit section. Without warning, he took my hand in his, the gesture startlingly intimate. "You need to see what he's doing in the back," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "I think you're being lied to, and you're not the only one." I pulled back slightly, bewildered. "I don't understand. Your son comes in here often, very often, and he spends a lot of money, cash. Today he's in our stockroom with someone, making a different kind of purchase, one we don't officially sell." My mind raced through horrible possibilities. Drugs? Stolen merchandise? "How do you know he's my son?" "He mentions you, often, when he needs things." Eli's eyes held a sadness that frightened me. "Follow me. There's a way to see into the stockroom without being noticed. I think you need to see this for yourself." Against every instinct that told me to leave, to return to the birthday party and the simple joy of my granddaughter's celebration, I nodded. Eli led me through a side door marked Employees Only, down a short hallway, and into a small office. From there, he opened another door that led into what appeared to be a storage area for extra inventory. "Stay behind those boxes," he whispered, pointing to a stack of board game shipments. "You can see through the gap, but they won't see you." With trembling legs, I positioned myself behind the cardboard fortress and peered through the narrow space between boxes. What I saw in those next moments would change everything I thought I knew about my family and shatter the trust I had built over decades. But it also led me to a painful truth I had been ignoring for far too long. This was not just about balloons or a birthday party. It was about betrayal, exploitation, and a secret that had been draining my life dry, one quiet lie at a time. Before I tell you what I saw in that stockroom, you need to understand how we got here. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent my entire life in Maplewood, Oregon, a town small enough that the seasonal changes in the town square's flower beds still make the local newspaper. I raised my only son, Daniel, on my own after my husband Robert passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack when Daniel was just 8 years old. One moment we were a complete family eating Saturday morning pancakes, and the next I was a widow trying to explain to a third grader why Daddy wouldn't be coming home. For 33 years, I worked as a school secretary at Maplewood Elementary. It wasn't glamorous, but it provided health insurance and enough income to keep a roof over our heads. I lived paycheck to paycheck, scrimping and saving, but I always made sure Daniel had what he needed: school supplies, decent clothes, summer camp when his friends were going. Sometimes it meant skipping meals myself or working overtime during holidays, but what mother wouldn't make those sacrifices? Daniel grew into a thoughtful, bright young man. He wasn't perfect. He had his moments of teenage rebellion and college-age mistakes, but his heart seemed good. When he brought Emily home to meet me during his senior year of college, I welcomed her with open arms and hopeful dreams of grandchildren. Emily was beautiful in that polished magazine cover way that sometimes made me feel self-conscious in my practical clothes and sensible shoes. She was quiet at first, maybe a little distant, but I chalked it up to nerves. When Lily was born 2 years later, I cried more than I did the day Daniel graduated. That little girl with her wide blue eyes and tiny fingers wrapped around mine lit up my life in ways I hadn't felt since Robert was alive. My retirement 3 years ago was modest, a small pension and Social Security. That covered my basic needs in the little house I'd finally paid off. I wasn't rich by any stretch, but I had enough to occasionally splurge on little surprises for Lily. Coloring books, storytime visits, cookies shaped like kittens. Simple things, but they meant the world to both of us. Over time, though, I noticed something shift. Daniel began asking for small favors, his voice always tinged with embarrassment that seemed genuine. "Hey, Mom, Emily's job has been slow this month. Could you help with the electric bill? Lily needs a new winter coat. We're strapped right now. Could you cover it?" Of course, I helped. Always. What kind of mother or grandmother would say no? I told myself it was temporary. Young families struggle. I'd been there myself. But then it became monthly, then weekly. The requests grew larger: rent, medical bills, car problems, private preschool tuition. There was always a reason, and always a tone of guilt in Daniel's voice that made me feel cruel for even hesitating. To cover their needs, I started making sacrifices that I kept to myself. I stopped refilling my blood pressure medication on time, stretching 30-day supplies to 45 days. I sold my engagement ring, the one thing I'd promised myself I'd never part with. I canceled dental appointments when my tooth ached, relying instead on over-the-counter painkillers. I told no one about these choices. What was the point? I loved my family, and I believed in helping them. Who else would they turn to? Still, a whisper inside me started to grow louder. Something didn't feel right. Every time I visited their rental house, a charming 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood, I noticed things that didn't quite match the story of financial struggle I'd been told. A new smart TV hanging on the wall, designer handbags casually tossed on the entryway bench, Emily's hair always freshly colored and cut, Lily's bedroom overflowing with toys still in their packaging, Daniel's closet lined with pressed button-downs that still had price tags I couldn't help but notice when I was helping put away laundry. But then Daniel would call again, voice strained, asking for just a bit more, and I would give it, ignoring the whisper that had become a constant hum in my mind. until the day of Lily's birthday party, until I stood hidden in that toy store stockroom watching my son count out cash, not from his wallet, but from a thick envelope he pulled from inside his jacket. Not just 20s, 50s, hundreds, more cash than I'd seen in one place in years. He was handing it over to a man I'd never seen before, someone older, with a trimmed salt and pepper beard and an expensive watch that caught the fluorescent light. The man smiled, handed Daniel a small paper bag, and patted him on the shoulder, like they were old friends. I thought maybe, it was something innocent, a special birthday present for Lily that needed to be paid in cash for some reason. But then Eli, the cashier, crept up beside me and whispered, "That's the third time this month he's been here, always pays in cash like that. And that guy, Trevor, he runs a side business, not exactly legal, limited edition collectibles. Some real, some not so real." I turned to Eli, stunned. "I don't understand. My son says they're barely affording groceries. They ask me for help every week." Eli looked down at his shoes, then back at me, his expression pained. "Ma'am, I wasn't going to say anything, but I've seen you come in here buying small things for your granddaughter. You count your change carefully. You use coupons." He hesitated. "Meanwhile, he's been buying expensive collector items. Not for his daughter. He flips them online for triple the price." My head felt light, the room suddenly too warm. Through the gap in the boxes, I watched Daniel shake hands with the man, tuck the paper bag into his jacket, and head toward the exit. "And Mrs. Carter?" Eli added, his voice so quiet I barely heard him. "Your daughter-in-law? She's been seen shopping at the outlet malls almost every weekend. My sister works at the Coach store there. Emily's their best customer." It all came crashing in. The bags I'd seen in their hall closet, the excuses, the guilt trips, the mysterious smiles between Daniel and Emily when I dropped off grocery bags. I left the store with a storm inside me, careful to exit through a side door Eli showed me to avoid running into Daniel, but I didn't confront him that day. I returned to the birthday party, somehow managed to smile and sing "Happy Birthday," and watched Lily blow out her candles as if my world hadn't just imploded. I needed more proof. I needed to be sure before I accused my only child of something so terrible. Little did I know, the truth was far worse than I could have imagined. I've never been one to act on impulse. My late husband Robert used to tease me about my endless lists and careful planning. "Evelyn," he'd say, "sometimes you just have to jump and build your wings on the way down." But caution had served me well over the years, especially after he was gone and every decision rested squarely on my shoulders. This situation with Daniel, however, required more than caution. It required strategy. Over the next week, I watched and listened with newly awakened senses. I didn't confront Daniel after the toy store incident. Instead, I became a quiet detective in my own family's life. First, I called Daniel the morning after Lily's party. "I'd love to drop by with some leftover cake," I said, keeping my voice light despite the heaviness in my chest. "Oh, Mom, today's not great," he replied quickly. "Emily's got a job interview, and I'm taking Lily to the dentist." "What about tomorrow?" I pressed. "We've got that thing at Lily's school, remember?" There was an edge to his voice I'd never noticed before. Or perhaps I'd simply refused to hear it. "Right, of course," I said, though there was no school event that I knew of. "Maybe next week, then." I hung up and made a note in the small notebook I'd begun keeping. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I drove to their neighborhood and parked a block away, where I could see their driveway but wouldn't be immediately noticed. At 10:30 a.m., Emily emerged from the house looking nothing like someone headed to a job interview. She wore designer sunglasses, yoga pants, and carried that expensive purse I'd seen in their entryway. She got into her car, the one Daniel had told me needed expensive repairs just last month, and drove away. 20 minutes later, Daniel came out with Lily. There was no rush, no indication they were heading to a dental appointment that might have a cancellation fee if they were late. Instead, they walked leisurely to his car, Lily skipping, alongside him with no sign of dental dread. I followed at a careful distance as they drove not to a dentist's office, but to the local mall. Through the food court windows, I watched them share a pretzel and ice cream, treats Daniel had recently told me they couldn't afford. My hands trembled as I made more notes. This wasn't the son I thought I knew. That afternoon, I called Lily's school, introducing myself as her grandmother, who needed to confirm details about next week's event. The secretary, who knew me from my years working in the school system, sounded confused. "We don't have any events scheduled until the science fair in 3 weeks, Evelyn." Oh, my mistake, I said, my suspicions confirmed. Senior moments, you know. Over the next few days, I made more discoveries. I asked neighbors subtle questions when I ran into them at the grocery store or pharmacy. I spoke with Lily's teachers on the pretense of wanting to volunteer. I even called the landlord of Daniel and Emily's rental property, pretending to be interested in the neighborhood for a friend moving to town. What I learned devastated me. Their rent wasn't $2,200 as Daniel had claimed when asking for my help. It was $2,500. They weren't behind on payments as he'd tearfully explained last month. In fact, according to their landlord, they were model tenants who always paid early. Emily wasn't struggling to find employment after being laid off. She had quietly launched an online shop selling high-end fashion accessories, many of which, based on my surreptitious browsing of her business Instagram page, looked remarkably similar to items I'd given them money to cover essential bills. Most painful of all, they were open about it with everyone except me. Their neighbors mentioned weekend trips I'd never heard about. Lily's teacher commented on the beautiful family vacation photos from Hawaii that my granddaughter had brought for show and tell, a trip explained to me as Emily visiting her sick aunt. The final confirmation came from an unexpected source. I ran into Chelsea, one of Emily's college friends, at the pharmacy while I was picking up my blood pressure medication. The prescription I'd finally refilled after stretching it dangerously thin to help with their emergency car repair. "Mrs. Carter," she exclaimed, giving me a quick hug. "I haven't seen you since Daniel and Emily's anniversary party." We chatted briefly about Lily and the weather before she mentioned, "Emily's shop is doing so well. Those vintage Gucci bags she finds are amazing. Daniel must be thrilled. He always said retail was her calling." I nodded and smiled, my heart cracking further. Yes, she's quite talented. Then Chelsea said something that would haunt me for days afterward. "I ran into them at First National last week. Daniel was joking about some investment they made." She laughed lightly. He said, "It's great having a built-in ATM in the family. My mom just wants to feel needed." I'm sure he was just being silly, though. She must have seen something change in my face because she quickly backpedaled. "I mean, he obviously appreciates everything you do for them." I made a non-committal sound and excused myself, barely making it to my car before the tears came. That night, alone in my kitchen, I spread out all my notes, bank statements, and the calendar where I'd marked every emergency request for money over the past 2 years. The pattern was undeniable. The truth was irrefutable. I wasn't helping my struggling son through hard times. I was being systematically exploited by my own child. They were living beyond their means, enjoying luxuries and experiences I couldn't afford for myself, while using my retirement savings, my future security, as their backup fund. All while making me believe I was being a good mother, a supportive grandmother. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. That night, I cried until there were no tears left. I cried for the son I thought I knew, for the relationship I believed we had, for the years of sacrifice that now felt hollow. Then, as dawn broke over my small backyard, something else broke inside me as well. The fear, the need to be needed, the desperation to be the perfect mother, even at the cost of my own well-being. In its place grew something stronger: dignity, self-respect, and the quiet, unshakable determination to reclaim my life. It was time for the truth to see daylight. On a quiet Wednesday evening in late September, I invited Daniel and Emily over for dinner. I told them Lily could stay with a neighbor for a couple of hours. "Just some grown-up time," I explained, keeping my voice casual. "I've made pot roast, Daniel's favorite." They arrived at 6, Emily carrying a bottle of wine that I recognized as an expensive brand, one I could never justify purchasing for myself. Daniel hugged me with the same warmth he always had, and for a moment, I almost weakened. Almost convinced myself I was mistaken, that there had to be some explanation that wouldn't shatter our family. But then I caught Emily's glance around my modest living room, the slight curl of her lip when she noticed the worn carpet I'd been meaning to replace for years, once I'd finished helping them with their temporary financial struggles. "Something smells amazing, Mom," Daniel said, hanging his jacket on the coat rack, the designer jacket I'd never seen before, with a small logo that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Let's eat while it's hot," I replied, leading them to the dining table I'd set with my best dishes, the ones that had belonged to my mother. Throughout dinner, I played my part. I asked about Lily's school projects. I commented on the beautiful fall weather. I served apple pie for dessert, homemade, the way Daniel had always loved it. We laughed, we talked. Everything appeared normal. Then, as Emily was complimenting the pie, I stood up and walked to the sideboard where I'd placed a folder earlier that day. "Before you go, I have something I'd like to discuss," I said, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. I returned to the table and opened the folder. Inside, printed receipts from Emily's online boutique, screenshots of her selling items I'd paid for a photo Eli had taken discreetly of Daniel handing over money at the toy store notes from my visit, to the landlord bank records showing a healthy savings account under Emily's name. A list of every financial emergency they'd claimed over the past 2 years, totaling nearly $38,000. Their smiles froze as I laid out each piece of evidence methodically, the way I used to organize field trip permission slips at the elementary school. "Mom, what is this?" Daniel's voice had an edge of panic. I looked at my son, my only child, the baby I had nursed through colic and chickenpox, the boy I had raised alone, the man I thought I knew, and said quietly, "This is the truth, Daniel. The truth you've been hiding from me while I've been cutting my pills in half to help you pay for emergencies that never existed." Emily's face hardened. "You've been spying on us?" Her voice was cold, indignant. "No, Emily. I've been seeing what's been in front of me all along. I've been choosing to believe my eyes rather than the lies you've both been telling me." Daniel attempted to explain. The collectibles were investments, he insisted. Emily's business was just starting out. They were planning to pay me back once they were stable. "When would that be, Daniel?" I asked. "After I've given you my last dollar? After I've lost my house to cover your emergencies?" "You're overreacting," Emily snapped. "Families help each other. It's not like you need all that money just for yourself." The casual cruelty of her words hung in the air between us. I took a deep breath. "I gave you everything I had, Daniel. Not just my money, my trust, my belief in you." My voice cracked slightly, but I pressed on. "You weren't just stealing my savings. You were stealing my dignity, making me think I was helping you, when really I was funding your lifestyle. A lifestyle you hid from me because you knew I couldn't afford it for myself." Daniel's face flushed. "Mom, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I interrupted, my calm finally slipping. "Explain to me how lying to your mother, making her feel guilty for hesitating to help, watching her go without so you could have more. Explain to me how that was love." Emily stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We don't have to sit here and be accused like criminals." So we stretched the truth a little. "You offered to help. We accepted. That's what families do." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. "No, Emily. Families support each other with honesty. They don't exploit each other's love." Daniel was stammering, trying to find words that would make this all go away. "It was temporary," he insisted. "We never meant harm. You're making this into something bigger than it is." I stood up then, walked to the door, and opened it. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. "You're not welcome in my home until you repay the dignity you've taken," I said calmly. "Not the money, the truth, the respect, the decency to treat me as your mother, not your personal bank." They left that night furious. Daniel red-faced and defensive, Emily cold and dismissive. As their car pulled away, I expected to collapse into tears again, but I didn't cry. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened, as if I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't naturally part of me. I slept that night without the aid of the sleeping pills I'd come to rely on. And in the morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made plans for myself. I called my doctor and scheduled the checkup I'd been postponing. I contacted a financial advisor to see what could be salvaged of my retirement. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try, but had denied myself because Daniel and Lily needed the money more. And I changed the spare key hidden under my porch planter. It wasn't about punishment. It was about protection, of my future, my well-being, and what remained of my heart. The road ahead would be difficult, I knew that. But, for the first time in a very long time, it was my road. And I would walk it with my head held high. In the months that followed my confrontation with Daniel and Emily, silence descended like winter frost, beautiful in its clarity, painful in its coldness. They didn't call. I didn't reach out. The absence of their demands created a strange emptiness in my days, a hollow space where worry and anxiety had lived for so long. Like a prisoner suddenly freed, I found myself disoriented by the very liberty I had sought. Thanksgiving approached, my first holiday without family since Daniel was born. Friends from church invited me to join their celebrations, but I declined politely. I needed this solitude, this quiet reckoning with myself and the new shape of my life. I made a small turkey breast, set my table for one with my good china, and lit a candle. As I sat down to eat, I found myself whispering grace. Not the rote prayer I'd recited for years, but words that rose unbidden from some deeper place. Thank you for the strength to stand up. Thank you for the courage to let go. And thank you for whatever comes next. December brought Christmas lights to Maplewood's streets and a dusting of snow that transformed our little town into a scene from a greeting card. I volunteered at the community center's holiday bazaar, wrapping gifts and serving hot chocolate. When people asked about my family plans, I simply smiled and said, "I'm keeping it simple this year." The truth was too complicated, too raw to share casually over peppermint-scented tables. My watercolor class became an unexpected sanctuary. Twice a week, I sat among strangers who gradually became friends, learning how to blend colors and capture light. My first paintings were hesitant, timid things, pale washes that barely showed on the paper. But my teacher, Eleanor, a retired art professor with silver hair and paint-stained hands, encouraged me with gentle persistence. "You're holding back, Evelyn," she said, one day, watching me add another cautious layer to a landscape. "The paper can take more than you think. Trust it. Trust yourself." I looked at her, this woman who knew nothing of my life's recent turmoil, and felt something crack open inside me. That afternoon, I painted with bold strokes and rich colors that bled into each other with wild abandon. The result was messy, imperfect, and more alive than anything I'd created before. Eleanor stood behind me, nodding. "Now you're painting," she said simply. January arrived with bitter cold, and the realization that I hadn't heard Lily's voice in almost 3 months. The ache of missing my granddaughter had become a constant companion, a shadow that followed me through brightening days. I wondered if she asked about me, if Daniel told her why. Grandma wasn't visiting anymore. Then one snowy afternoon, a knock at my door changed everything. I wasn't expecting visitors. The paths were treacherous with ice, and most of Maplewood had hunkered down to wait out the winter storm. I peered through the peephole, my heart leaping painfully at the small figure bundled in a purple coat. Lily. I threw open the door to find my granddaughter standing on my porch, snow dusting her woolen hat, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Behind her, at the edge of my property, stood a woman I recognized as our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, watching from a respectful distance. "Lily?" I gasped. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? It's freezing." Her small face, pinked by cold, looked up at me with a solemnity no 7-year-old should possess. "Mrs. Peterson brought me. I asked her to." She thrust a folded paper toward me. "I made you something." I ushered her inside, signaling grateful thanks to Mrs. Peterson, who nodded and returned to her idling car. Once in the warmth of my living room, Lily peeled off her damp outer layers while I made hot chocolate. The real kind, with milk and actual chocolate, not the powdered mix Emily insisted was, just as good. "Grandma," she said, her voice small but determined. "Are you mad at us?" The simple question nearly undid me. I sat beside her on the sofa, careful to give her space. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you. Not ever at you. But you don't come over anymore. And Daddy gets quiet when I ask about you. And Mommy says you're being difficult." She pronounced the last word carefully, clearly repeating something she'd heard. I took a deep breath. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, Lily. It doesn't mean we stop loving each other. It just means we need some time to figure things out." She nodded, considering this with the remarkable adaptability of children. Then she handed me the folded paper she'd been clutching. "I made this in art class." I opened it to find a drawing, her, me, and a heart between us. Simple, profound. At the bottom, in her careful first-grade handwriting, "I miss you, Grandma. I love your smile." That moment reminded me why I had made the hard choice. It was never about revenge or punishment. It was about breaking a cycle that would eventually have taught Lily that love means exploitation, that family bonds are transactional, rather than sacred. I hugged her then, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and winter air. "I miss you too, sweet pea. More than you know." We spent the afternoon making cookies and playing board games until Mrs. Peterson returned to take her home. As they left, Lily turned back. "Can I come again?" "Any time," I said, knowing it wasn't that simple, but needing her to know my door would always be open to her. That night, I called Daniel for the first time since our confrontation. When he answered, his voice was guarded, wary. "Mom?" "Daniel, thank you for letting Lily visit today." A pause. "I didn't. Emily's going to be furious when she finds out Lily went behind our backs." The implication stung. That contact with me was something to be policed, punished. But I kept my voice steady. "She's a child who misses her grandmother. There shouldn't be sides here, Daniel." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you want, Mom?" What did I want? Such a simple question with such a complicated answer. "I want to see my granddaughter without secrets and schemes. I want honesty between us. I want you to understand why what you did was so deeply wrong." His sigh carried through. The phone line, heavy with unspoken words. "It wasn't like you think, Mom. We got in over our heads. Things escalated." It wasn't an apology, but it was the first crack in the wall of denial he'd built. I decided to take it as a beginning. "Would you be willing to talk about it? Really talk? Not just defend or explain away, but listen to how it affected me?" Silence stretched between us, taut, as a wire. Finally, "Maybe. I don't know. I need to think." It wasn't much, but it was something. "Lily can visit whenever she wants," I said softly. "You can tell Emily that. And Daniel, the door is open for you too, when you're ready." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, turning the day's events over in my mind. Lily's visit, the tentative conversation with Daniel, the small, fragile seed of possibility that had been planted. That night, in my watercolor class, I began a new painting. A garden in early spring, where green shoots pushed through snow, reaching for light. Eleanor watched over my shoulder as I worked. "Hope?" she asked simply. I nodded, adding another brushstroke. "Just beginning. But yes, hope." 3 weeks after Lily's surprise visit, on a February morning when the Oregon sky hung low and gray, my doorbell rang. I was in the middle of sorting through old photographs, part of my new project to organize decades of memories, and wasn't expecting company. When I opened the door, Daniel stood on my porch, hands thrust deep in his coat pockets, shoulders hunched against the damp chill. He looked thinner than when I'd last seen him, quieter. His eyes met mine briefly, before sliding away. "Hi, Mom." 2 simple words that carried the weight of months of silence, hurt, and unspoken regrets. "Daniel." I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, it's freezing out there." He entered hesitantly, like a visitor rather than the son who had once treated this house as an extension of his own. I noticed he didn't immediately head for the refrigerator or flop onto the couch as he used to. Instead, he stood awkwardly in the entry, waiting to be invited further. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, falling back on the rituals of hospitality to bridge the awkwardness. He nodded. "That would be nice. Thanks." In the kitchen, I went through the familiar motions of brewing coffee, hyper-aware of his presence at my small dining table. When I set a steaming mug, before him, in the chipped Oregon Ducks mug that had been his for years, he wrapped his hands around it as if seeking warmth more than caffeine. "You look good, Mom," he said finally. Different somehow. I touched my hair self-consciously. I had started styling it differently, wearing it loose instead of in the practical bun I'd favored for years. "I've been taking better care of myself," I replied simply. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the mug. "That's good. You deserve that." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "It's not everything," he said, sliding it across the table. "But it's a start. I got a second job, night security at the hospital. We're selling the car, the new one. Emily's staying with her sister for a while." I didn't immediately reach for the envelope. "You and Emily are having problems?" A humorless laugh escaped him. "You could say that. After what happened, things got complicated. I started questioning everything. Our spending, our values. What we were teaching Lily." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart twisted. Emily didn't appreciate the questions. I took a sip of my coffee, giving myself time to process this information. "I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time," I said finally. "And I meant it, despite everything." "Are you?" His voice held no accusation, just genuine curiosity. After what we did to you? You're still my son, Daniel. Your pain will always matter. To me. I reached for the envelope then, setting it aside without opening it. But this isn't just about money. He nodded, eyes fixed on his coffee. I know. It's about trust, respect, all the things I threw away because it was easier than being honest. He looked up finally, meeting my gaze. I let you carry me long after I should have been walking on my own. The simple acknowledgement, free of excuses or deflection, was more meaningful than any amount of money he could have brought. What happened, Daniel? I asked softly. When did it start? The lying? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. It wasn't one big decision. It was 1,000 small ones. The first time I exaggerated a bill we needed help with, it seemed harmless. You wanted to help. We needed it, or thought we did. He shook his head. Then it got easier. Each time the amount got a little bigger, the story a little more elaborate. Emily was good at coming up with convincing details. And the collector items? The reselling? A flush crept up his neck. That started as a side hustle. Buy limited editions, flip them for profit. But then it became almost a game. How much could we make? How quickly could we turn it around? I told myself it was smart business, not... He trailed off. Not exploiting your mother. I finished for him. He flinched but nodded. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I just didn't let myself think about it too deeply. He looked around my modest kitchen, as if seeing it truly for the first time. I didn't want to see what it was costing you. We talked for nearly 2 hours. That morning. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years, perhaps ever. Daniel spoke about feeling inadequate compared to Emily's wealthy college friends, about the pressure to provide Lily with everything, about how easy it had become to see me as a resource rather than a person with needs of my own. I shared, too, about the loneliness of retirement, the fear of becoming irrelevant, how helping them had given me purpose even as it drained my security. I enabled it, I admitted. I wanted to be needed so badly that I ignored all the warning signs. When Daniel finally rose to leave, something had shifted between us. Not healed, that would take much more time, but acknowledged, seen clearly in the harsh light of honesty rather than the soft glow of denial. At the door, he hesitated. Lily asks, about you every day. Would it be okay if I brought her by this weekend? Just her and me? I'd like that very much. He nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. Mom, I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry, truly sorry. I know, I said, and for the first time I believed it. After he left, I opened the envelope he'd brought. Inside was $3,000 in cash and a handwritten payment plan for the remainder. It was a practical gesture, necessary but insufficient on its own. What mattered more was what I'd seen in his eyes, genuine remorse and the first fragile shoots of accountability. That evening, I added another element to my spring garden painting, a bench where 2 figures sat together, their postures suggesting both distance and connection, not touching, but facing one another. Talking. Beginning again. When Eleanor saw it at our next class, she nodded in approval. Reconciliation is never a straight line, she observed. More like a spiral, moving forward but sometimes circling back to the same issues. The important thing is that the spiral trends upward. Is that the artist in you talking, or the grandmother of 4? I asked with a small smile. She laughed. Both. I suppose, art and family, they both require patience, forgiveness, and the courage to start over when things go wrong. I thought about Daniel's visit, about the long road ahead of us. And they're both worth the effort, I said, even when they break your heart. The first Saturday of March brought Daniel and Lily to my doorstep, their faces bright with anticipation. Lily bounded into my arms while Daniel followed with a shy smile, carrying a canvas bag filled with board games and art supplies. Grandma, Dad said we can stay all day, Lily announced, her excitement palpable. All day it is, I agreed, my heart lightening at her enthusiasm. I've made your favorite snickerdoodles. We settled into a rhythm that day, baking cookies, playing Monopoly, where I discovered Lily had inherited her grandfather's competitive streak, and working on art projects at the kitchen table. Daniel participated but gave us space too, stepping out to take a phone call or retreating to the living room with a book. During one such moment, as Daniel took a work call on the porch and Lily and I sat coloring, my granddaughter looked up at me with serious eyes. Daddy says you and him had a big disagreement. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. That's right, sweet pea. But we're working on it. Was it about money? She asked, surprising me with her perception. Because I heard Mommy telling Aunt Jess that Grandma finally turned off the money faucet. The innocence with which she repeated those callous words made my stomach clench. It was about honesty, Lily. About telling the truth to people you love, even when it's hard. She considered this, her crayon pausing over her drawing. Like when I broke Mommy's perfume but said I didn't? Something like that, I said gently. Only grown-up problems are usually bigger and more complicated. She nodded sagely. That's why Mommy went to stay with Aunt Jess, because of grown-up problems. Her focus returned to her coloring. I think she's mad at Daddy. And you. But Daddy says we need to fix things ourselves and not… She concentrated, clearly quoting verbatim, rely on others to bail us out. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. Your daddy's a smart man, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. Sometimes the hardest thing is learning to stand on your own. Like when I learned to ride my bike without training wheels? I smiled. Exactly like that. Daniel's visits with Lily became a weekly tradition. Sometimes they brought lunch from the deli downtown. Other times we cooked together. Simple meals that became occasions for laughter and stories. Daniel began helping around the house, fixing the leaky bathroom faucet, replacing the porch light that had flickered for months. Small gestures. Rebuilding trust one screw, one wire, one conversation at a time. Emily remained distant, a name rarely mentioned, a shadow over Lily's occasional stories. I gathered from snippets of conversation that she hadn't returned home, that her visit to her sister had extended indefinitely. I didn't pry. Daniel's journey was difficult enough without my intrusion into his marriage. April brought my 69th birthday. I expected a quiet day, perhaps a phone call from Daniel and a card from Lily. Instead, I opened my door that morning to find Eli Peterson from the toy store standing on my porch, holding a white bakery box. Eli, I exclaimed, surprised. We'd spoken occasionally since the day he'd called me to the store, but never outside that context. He smiled, a hint of shyness in his eye expression. Happy birthday, Mrs. Carter. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, I assured him. But how did you know it was my birthday? Your son mentioned it when he was in the store yesterday. He was buying something for you, I think. He extended the box. I thought you might like these. They're from Marigold Bakery, best cinnamon rolls in town. The gesture was unexpected but touching. I invited him in for coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table, the freshly baked cinnamon rolls filling the house with their sweet aroma. I've been meaning to thank you, I said, for what you did that day, for having the courage to call me. Eli looked down at his coffee cup. It wasn't an easy decision. I worried I was overstepping, interfering in something that wasn't my business. It was a kindness, I insisted, one that probably saved me from financial ruin. He glanced up, his expression earnest. I recognized something in you, Mrs. Carter, something I saw in my own grandmother before she passed. She gave everything to my dad, her savings, her home equity, her retirement, all because he knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. His voice grew quieter. By the time we realized what was happening, there was nothing left. She spent her last years living in my tiny apartment, dependent on my entry-level salary. The parallel wasn't lost on me. I'm sorry about your grandmother, and grateful you spared me a similar fate. Before Eli left, he mentioned a senior art exhibition at the community center. My aunt's watercolor group is showing their work. I think you'd enjoy it. I promised to check it out, touched by his thoughtfulness. Later that day, Daniel and Lily arrived with gifts. A silver bracelet from Lily. I saved my allowance for 2 whole months. And from Daniel, a gift certificate for a day at a local spa. You've always taken care of everyone else, he said as I opened it. It's time someone took care of you. The community center exhibition turned out to be a revelation. Walking through the display of paintings created by artists in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, I felt a kinship with these strangers who had found beauty and purpose in their later years. Some had been painting all their lives. Others, like me, had discovered art only after retirement. My teacher, Eleanor, spotted me admiring a particularly striking landscape. You should submit something for the next show, she suggested. That garden piece you've been working on is coming along beautifully. I laughed off the idea. I'm nowhere near this level. Art isn't about levels, Evelyn. It's about expression. About having the courage to put something of yourself into the world. Her words stayed with me, echoing as I wandered through the exhibition. Near the exit, I spotted Eli chatting with an older woman who bore a striking resemblance to him. His aunt, I presumed. He waved me over, introducing me with a warmth that suggested he'd mentioned me before. "So you're the watercolor student," his Aunt Martha said with a smile. "Eli tells me you're quite talented." "Eli is being kind," I demurred. "I'm very much a beginner." "We're all beginners at something," Martha replied. "I didn't pick up a brush until I was 62. Now I can't imagine my life without it." As spring deepened into early summer, my life took on a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for watercolor classes. Saturdays were for Daniel and Lily. Sundays found me at church, where I joined the hospitality committee, arranging flowers and greeting newcomers. The rest of my days filled with small pleasures I'd denied myself for too long. Morning walks, library visits, coffee with new friends from my art class. Occasionally, Eli would stop by with a book he thought I'd enjoy, or news about upcoming community events. I began working on a series of watercolors for the fall exhibition, not just the garden scene, but others too. A portrait of Lily, her face alight with laughter, the view from my kitchen window at dawn, hands, old hands, my hands, holding a delicate teacup. Eleanor praised my progress, noting how my brushstrokes had grown more confident, my use of color more intuitive. "You're finding your voice," she told me, "your authentic expression." In June, Daniel came alone one evening, his expression both nervous and resolved. "Emily's filed for divorce," he said without preamble as we sat on my back porch. "She says I've changed, that I'm not fun anymore." A bitter smile crossed his lips. "Apparently, taking responsibility for our finances and refusing to manipulate you for money makes me boring." I reached for his hand. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Truly." He squeezed my fingers. "I'm not. Not really. It's been coming for a long time." He looked out at my small garden, where early summer flowers nodded in the evening breeze. "The thing is, Mom, she wants full custody of Lily. She's claiming I can't provide a stable home now that I've downgraded our lifestyle." The injustice of it stole my breath. "She can't possibly— Her parents have money," he interrupted. "Good lawyers, and she's gathering character. Witnesses, friends who will testify that I've become unstable since I stopped. Well, since I stopped using you as our personal bank. The unfairness burned like acid. After everything, after all the exploitation and lies, Emily was positioning herself as the victim. What can I do?" I asked, anger and determination rising within me. Daniel looked at me, his eyes both weary and resolute. "Would you be willing to tell our story in court? All of it? The financial manipulation, the lies, what you discovered at the toy store?" The prospect was daunting. Laying bare our family's painful secrets in a public forum, exposing both Daniel's wrongdoing and my own naivety. But the alternative, allowing Emily to use her deception as a weapon to take Lily, was unthinkable. "Of course I will," I said. "Whatever it takes." As Daniel left that night, he hugged me tightly. "I'm still ashamed of what I did," he whispered, "but I'm trying to be someone you can be proud of again." "I know," I told him, "and you're getting there, one day at a time." That night, I added a new element to my garden painting. Storm clouds breaking apart, revealing patches of clear blue sky. Not perfect weather, but changing. Hopeful. The family court hearing was scheduled for a sweltering day in mid-July. I wore my best dress, navy blue with small white flowers, and a strand of pearls that had been my mother's. Daniel met me outside the courthouse, his face drawn but determined in a pressed suit that looked newly purchased. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. I nodded, though my stomach churned with anxiety. Public speaking had never been my strength, and the thought of airing our family's painful truths before strangers terrified me. But for Lily, for her future, for her right to have her father in her life, I would find the courage. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, wood-paneled and formal. Emily sat at one table with her attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. Emily looked polished and composed, her blonde hair arranged in a professional updo, her expression one of quiet suffering, the wronged wife, the concerned mother. When she saw me enter with Daniel, her eyes narrowed briefly before her face resumed its mask of dignified distress. I was called to testify after several of Emily's friends had painted Daniel as increasingly erratic, controlling about money, and unable to provide the quality of life to which Lily was accustomed. Each testimony had driven the knife deeper into my heart, twisting the truth until it was unrecognizable. As I took the stand and swore to tell the truth, I caught sight of a familiar face at the back of the courtroom. Eli Peterson sat quietly in the last row, offering a small nod of encouragement when our eyes met. "Mrs. Carter," Daniel's attorney began, "could you describe your financial relationship with your son and daughter-in-law over the past few years?" I took a deep breath and began to speak, slowly at first, then with increasing clarity as the story unfolded. I described the escalating requests for help, the discovery at the toy store, the evidence I'd gathered of their deception. I explained how they had systematically exploited my love while I skipped medications and dental care to fund their lifestyle. "And Mrs. Carter," the attorney continued, "in your observation, how has your son's behavior changed in recent months?" "He's taken responsibility," I said simply. "He's working 2 jobs to repay me. He's living within his means. He's teaching Lily about honesty and consequences in a way she can understand." I looked directly at the judge. "My son made serious mistakes. He knows that. He's admitted it, but he's doing everything possible to make amends and be the father Lily deserves." Emily's attorney cross-examined me sharply, suggesting I was confused about financial matters and manipulated by Daniel's sudden attention. She implied that at my age, memory could be unreliable, that perhaps I'd misunderstood the situation. The insinuation stung, but I remained calm. "I may be 69, I said, "but I was clear-headed enough to recognize when I was being deceived. And I'm clear-headed enough now to recognize genuine change when I see it." When Eli took the stand as a surprise witness for Daniel, Emily's composure finally cracked. His testimony about what he'd witnessed at the toy store, about Daniel's recent transformation, and about Emily's continued extravagant spending while claiming financial hardship, struck at the heart of her carefully constructed narrative. By the time the judge called a recess to consider her ruling, Emily was visibly shaken. In the courthouse hallway, she approached me, her voice low and venomous. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "Are you happy now?" I looked at her, this woman who had entered my family with such promise, who had given me my precious granddaughter, but who had chosen deception as her way of life, and felt only sadness. "No, Emily, I'm not happy. I'm heartbroken that it came to this, that you saw me as nothing more than a resource to be drained." I met her gaze steadily. "But I won't apologize for telling the truth." She turned away, her shoulders rigid with anger, and rejoined her cluster of supporters. Eli approached me then, offering a bottle of water. "You did great in there," he said. "It can't have been easy." "Nothing about this is easy," I admitted. "But thank you for coming, for speaking up. Some truths need to be told," he said simply. When the judge delivered her ruling, it was better than we'd dared hope. Daniel would have primary custody, with Emily granted visitation rights. The judge cited concerns about Emily's pattern of financial dishonesty and unwillingness to acknowledge harmful behavior as factors in her decision. As we left the courthouse, Daniel was quiet, the victory tempered by the painful reality of his broken marriage and the knowledge that Lily would now shuttle between 2 homes, 2 worldviews. "She'll adjust," I assured him, though my heart ached for my granddaughter. "Children are resilient." "I hope so," he said. "I just want her to grow up understanding the difference between wants and needs, between honesty and convenience." He looked at me, his expression somber. All the things I forgot somewhere along the way. That evening we celebrated quietly at my house with takeout pizza, Lily's favorite. She was with Emily that night but would come to Daniel's apartment the next day under the new arrangement. As we ate, Daniel asked about my painting, and I showed him the nearly completed garden scene. "It's beautiful, Mom," he said, studying the storm clouds giving way to blue sky, the bench where 2 figures sat in conversation. "I can almost feel the hope in it." "That's the point," I told him, "to capture not just how things look, but how they feel." After Daniel left, I sat on my porch, watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. My phone buzzed with a text message from Eli. "Hope everything turned out okay. You showed real courage today." I smiled, typing back a simple, "Thank you, it did." August brought the completion of my garden painting and the beginning of a new watercolor series. This one focused on transitions, on doorways and thresholds, on passages from one state of being to another. Eleanor pronounced them my strongest work yet. "You're not just painting what you see anymore," she observed. You're painting what you know. Daniel found an apartment closer to my house, a modest 2-bedroom with a small yard where Lily could play. I helped him furnish it with carefully chosen secondhand pieces, teaching him the satisfaction of creating a comfortable home without extravagant spending. Emily remained cool and distant during custody exchanges, but as the weeks passed, some of her bitterness seemed to soften. Perhaps it was seeing Lily thrive despite the changes. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which Daniel handled the situation, never speaking ill of her to their daughter, never using the court's findings as a weapon. One September afternoon, as I was preparing for the community center's fall art exhibition, my doorbell rang. Emily stood on my porch, looking less polished than usual, more human somehow. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual edge. Surprised, I stepped back to admit her. We sat in my living room, the awkwardness between us palpable. "I've been thinking about what you said at the courthouse," she began. "About being heartbroken, not vindictive." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I didn't want to believe it. It was easier to paint you as the villain." I waited, sensing she had more to say. "My parents," she continued hesitantly, "they always measured love in things, in status. I thought that's what mattered, what would make me happy." She looked around my modest living room, her gaze lingering on my watercolors hanging on the wall. "But Lily talks about being here like it's some kind of magical place, not because of toys or expensive outings, but because of, I don't know, cookies and stories and feeling safe." Her voice broke, slightly on the last word, and I glimpsed, perhaps for the first time, the insecurity beneath her polished exterior. "It's not too late to show her a different way," I said gently, "to be part of that safety." Emily nodded, blinking rapidly. "I'm trying. I've started therapy, taken a real job instead of the boutique fantasy." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying, too." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There were no tearful hugs or promises of instant harmony, but it was a beginning, another doorway, another threshold crossed. That night, I added the final touches to my exhibition pieces, signing each one with my initials and the date. As I worked, I thought about all the transitions of the past year, from exploitation to honesty, from enabling to boundaries, from silence to truth. None of it had been easy. All of it had been necessary. The community center's fall art exhibition opened on a crisp October evening. Golden light spilled from the windows onto the sidewalk as residents of Maplewood gathered to admire the work of local artists. My 4 watercolors, the garden scene, the portrait of Lily, and 2 from my Threshold series, hung on the wall beside pieces created by Eleanor and the other members of our class. I stood nervously near my display, wearing a new dress I'd purchased specifically for the occasion, deep burgundy, with a flowing skirt that made me feel both elegant and artistic. Eleanor had insisted we all dress the part. "You're not just observers tonight," she had declared during our final class. "You're artists. Own it." Daniel arrived first, with Lily bouncing excitedly beside him. She wore a party dress and had a small bouquet of daisies clutched in her hand. "These are for you, Grandma," she announced, presenting them with a flourish. "Because you're famous now," I laughed, accepting the flowers with appropriate solemnity. "Hardly famous, sweet pea, but thank you." Daniel hugged me, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Mom," before stepping back to examine my paintings. His eyes lingered on the garden scene with its storm clouds giving way to blue sky. "This one's my favorite," he said quietly, "for obvious reasons." As the evening progressed, neighbors and friends stopped by to admire the artwork and chat. Martha, Eli's aunt, made a point of introducing me to several members of the local arts council. "Evelyn has a remarkable eye for emotional resonance," she told them, using terminology I was only beginning to understand. "Her work speaks to transition and renewal in a very authentic way." I felt a blush creep up my neck at the praise, still unaccustomed to thinking of myself as someone with creative gifts worth noticing. Near the exhibition's midpoint, I was surprised to see Emily arrive. She stood hesitantly at the entrance for a moment before Lily spotted her and ran over, pulling her toward our little group. Emily nodded hello to Daniel and me, her smile small but genuine. "These are wonderful, Evelyn," she said, studying my paintings with what appeared to be sincere interest. "Especially this one." She indicated the portrait of Lily, whose laughing face captured a moment of pure childhood joy. You've really seen her, haven't you? The real her. The observation struck me as significant, coming from Emily. Perhaps she was beginning to see beyond surfaces, too. As the three of them moved on to view other exhibits, Eli appeared at my side, offering a glass of punch from the refreshment table. Quite a turnout, he commented, surveying the crowded room. And well-deserved. Your work is something special, Mrs. Carter. Evelyn, I corrected gently. After all we'd been through, formality seemed unnecessary. And thank you for the compliment and for, well, everything else. He understood my meaning. Sometimes doing the right thing works out in unexpected ways, he said, gesturing toward Daniel, Emily, and Lily, who were now examining a pottery display together, their interactions civil if not entirely comfortable. I'm glad things seem to be improving. Slowly, I agreed, one day at a time. We stood in companionable silence for a moment before Eli spoke again, his voice taking on a hint of nervousness I hadn't heard since that fateful day at the toy store. I was wondering if you might like to join me for coffee. Sometime. Or lunch, perhaps. The cafe near the bookstore has an excellent autumn menu. The invitation caught me off guard. At 69, I hadn't considered the possibility of… what? Friendship? Something more? I studied Eli, probably 15 years my junior, kind-eyed, thoughtful. I'd like that, I heard myself saying. Coffee sounds lovely. His smile warmed me more than the punch ever could. Later that evening, as the exhibition wound down, Eleanor gathered her students for a group photograph. For the community newsletter, she explained, positioning us before our displayed work. As we smiled for the camera, I felt a profound sense of belonging to this group, to this moment, to this new chapter of my life that had opened so unexpectedly, from financial exploitation to artistic expression, from isolation to community. The journey had been painful, but standing there surrounded by new friends and reconciling family, I couldn't regret a single step of it. The following week brought the first frost of the season, coating my garden in a delicate white that transformed ordinary plants into crystalline sculptures. I was capturing the scene in quick sketches when my phone rang. Daniel, his voice tight with a combination of anxiety and excitement. Mom, I got it. The manager position at Westside Credit Union. Full benefits, regular hours, and enough salary that I can finally start making real headway on repaying you. That's wonderful news, I exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for him. The position was one he'd been interviewing for over several weeks, a significant step, up from the 2 part-time jobs he'd been juggling since the divorce. There's more, he continued. It means I can afford a better place. Not anything extravagant, he added quickly, but a small house with a yard for Lily, maybe even in your neighborhood. The prospect of having them nearby filled me with quiet joy. That would be lovely, Daniel. I've been looking at listings, he admitted. There's one on Maple Avenue that seems promising. Would you be willing to come see it with me this weekend? I value your opinion. The simple request, his acknowledgement that my opinion mattered, that he wanted my involvement in a decision rather than just my financial support, meant more than he could know. Of course, I said. I'd be honored. After we hung up, I returned to my sketching, adding details to capture the way sunlight sparked off frost-covered leaves. My skills had improved dramatically over the past months, but more importantly, so had my confidence. I no longer hesitated before applying color, no longer apologized for my artistic choices. Eleanor had been right. I was finding my voice, not just in art, but in life. Coffee with Eli evolved into regular lunch dates, museum visits, and long walks through Maplewood's tree-lined streets as autumn deepened. He was easy company, intelligent without being pretentious, funny without being sarcastic, attentive without being overbearing. You never told me why you called me that day, I said during one of our walks, a question that had lingered in my mind. You must have seen other customers being deceived or exploited. What? Made you step in for me? Eli was quiet for a moment, scuffing through fallen leaves as he considered. My grandmother, he said finally. What happened to her? Watching her give everything away to people who just took and took. It changed me, made me more aware. He glanced at me. When I saw you counting pennies for a small toy for your granddaughter, then watched your son spending hundreds in cash on collectibles he claimed were investments. It reminded me too much of her situation. You took a risk, I pointed out. Daniel could have been angry. I could have refused to believe you. Some risks are worth taking, he said simply. In November, Daniel closed on the Maple Avenue house, a modest bungalow just 6 blocks from mine, with a maple tree in the front yard and a swing set in the back. He asked for my help choosing paint colors and curtains, tasks I approached with perhaps excessive enthusiasm after years of having my design suggestions politely ignored by Emily. The joint custody arrangement had settled into a predictable rhythm, Lily with Daniel on weekdays and alternate weekends, with Emily taking the other weekends and Wednesday evenings. To everyone's surprise, Emily had maintained her commitment to therapy and her new job at an accounting firm, showing a steadiness few of us had expected. One Wednesday evening, she arrived to pick up Lily from my house, where I'd been watching her after school. Instead of the usual quick exchange at the door, Emily accepted my offer of tea, and we sat at my kitchen table while Lily finished a drawing in the living room. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Emily said, turning her teacup in small circles. "How did you do it? Start over at your age?" The question wasn't asked with her former condescension, but with genuine curiosity, perhaps even a hint of admiration. "One small decision at a time," I answered honestly. "And by remembering that it's never too late to live with integrity, to create a life that reflects your true values, not just the things you think you should want." She nodded slowly. "I'm trying to figure that out, what I actually value, beneath all the performance." She glanced toward the living room, where Lily was humming to herself as she colored. "I want her to see that in me. The real stuff, not just the shiny surface." "She will," I assured her. "Children are remarkably perceptive. They notice effort and authenticity more than perfection." As they left, Emily paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on us entirely, for letting Lily keep all her family, even after everything." It wasn't an explicit apology for the years of deception, but it was an acknowledgement of my choice to remain open to healing, to refuse the easy path of permanent estrangement. For now, that was enough. December brought preparations for Christmas, my second holiday season since the confrontation, but the first where our family wounds had begun to heal rather than simply scab over. Daniel and I established new traditions, simpler ones focused on experiences rather than extravagance. We baked cookies with Lily, drove through neighborhoods to admire light displays, and volunteered serving meals at the community center. On Christmas Eve, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Daniel and Lily, of course, but also Eli, Eleanor from my watercolor class, and a few other friends I'd made over the past year. To everyone's surprise, Emily joined us for dessert, bringing a beautifully decorated Yule log cake from a local bakery. As we gathered around my living room afterward, the tree lights casting a warm glow over faces both familiar and new, I was struck by how much had changed in a single year. The painful confrontation, the months of silence, the cautious rebuilding, all of it had led here, to this moment of genuine connection. Not perfect, not without lingering hurts and careful boundaries, but real in a way my relationship with Daniel hadn't been for years. Later, after the guests had departed and only Daniel and Lily remained, helping me wash the last of the dishes, my son turned to me with an expression of quiet reflection. "You know what I realized today?" he said, drying a serving platter. "This is the happiest Christmas I've had since I was a kid, not because of stuff or appearances, but because it feels honest." I squeezed his arm, gently. "That's the best gift of all, isn't it? Being able to stand in your truth and still find joy." After they left, I sat alone by the Christmas tree, savoring the peaceful silence of my home. On the mantel stood a framed photograph from the art exhibition, my smiling face surrounded by my new community of friends. Beside it sat a small wrapped package Eli had handed me with shy ceremony. "Before leaving, to open when you're alone," he'd instructed. I carefully removed the paper to find a carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a silver charm bracelet with a single charm, a painter's palette. The card read simply, "For new beginnings, with admiration and hope, Eli." I fastened it around my wrist, the silver cool against my skin, and thought about all the different kinds of courage it takes to begin again, to stand up for yourself, to tell difficult truths, to open your heart after betrayal, to believe that some stories don't end with the pain, but continue into healing. Spring came early to Maplewood the following year, bringing cherry blossoms and daffodils in a sudden explosion of color after the long gray winter. I celebrated my 70th birthday, not as an ending, but as a beginning. A milestone marked by a small gathering in my backyard, where friends and family toasted to many more years of art and adventure. Eli stood beside me as we cut the cake, his hand warm against the small of my back. Our relationship had evolved slowly, thoughtfully over the past months. Coffee dates becoming dinner dates, conversations growing deeper, affection blooming. With the steady patience of people who understood the value of taking time to build something genuine. To Evelyn, he said, raising his glass, who taught us all that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice that says, I deserve better, I deserve truth. The others echoed his toast, their faces bright with affection that still sometimes caught me by surprise. Daniel, watching from across the patio where he was helping Lily fill paper cups with lemonade, gave me a small nod, private acknowledgement of how far we'd come since that fateful birthday party a year and a half ago. My life had expanded in ways I couldn't have imagined when I stood in that toy store stockroom, watching my son count out cash for collectibles while I pinched pennies for necessities. The watercolor classes had led to a small showing at a local gallery. The community center had asked me to teach a beginner's class for seniors. My circle of friends had widened, bringing movie nights, book discussions, and weekend outings that filled my calendar with genuine pleasure rather than obligation. The most profound change, however, was internal. A settling into myself, a quiet confidence that came from standing in my truth and discovering I was stronger than I'd believed. The fear that had kept me tethered to Daniel's manipulation, fear of losing his love, of being alone, of having no purpose, had dissolved in the light of honest self-examination. After the party, as Eli and I washed dishes side by side in my kitchen, he asked about my plans for the summer. Eleanor mentioned a plein air painting. Retreat in the Columbia River Gorge, I said. I'm considering it, though I've never done anything like that before. You should go, he encouraged. Your landscapes are beautiful. Imagine what you could create with those vistas as inspiration. I smiled, passing him a rinsed plate. What about you? Any summer plans? He hesitated, then turned to face me fully. Actually, I've been thinking about a trip to the coast. A week, maybe 2. There's a little bed and breakfast in Cannon Beach I've always wanted to visit. His eyes met mine, warm with invitation. I'd love it if you'd consider joining me. The suggestion hung between us, significant in its implications. We had been taking things slowly, both of us cautious after our respective histories. His painful divorce years earlier, my recent family upheaval. A vacation together would mark a new level of commitment. I'd like that, I said softly. Very much. His smile lit something warm inside me. Not the desperate need for approval I'd once mistaken for love, but something steadier, more sustaining. The coastal trip was planned for July, but before that came another significant event, Daniel's final repayment. Over the past 18 months, he had faithfully adhered to the schedule he'd created, transferring money each month without fail, even when it meant sacrificing his own comforts. The amount never replaced what had been taken over years of deception, but the consistency of his effort meant more than the dollars themselves. On a sunny June afternoon, he arrived at my house with an envelope and a potted rose bush. We sat on the porch swing as he handed me both. The last payment, he said simply, and something that will hopefully last longer than money. I accepted the envelope without opening it, setting it aside to focus on the plant, a peace rose with delicate yellow blooms edged in pink. It's beautiful, Daniel. Thank you. I thought we could plant it together, he suggested. A symbol of new growth, maybe. We spent the next hour digging in my garden, our hands working the soil side by side as we had so often during his childhood. The physical labor created space for conversation that might have been awkward in the stillness of the living room. I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, Daniel said as we tamped soil around the rose's roots, about what he would think of everything that's happened. I paused, sitting back on my heels. Robert had been gone for nearly 30 years, but his presence still lingered in Daniel's mannerisms, in the shape of his hands, in the questions that could never be fully answered. He would have been disappointed in the choices, I said honestly, but immensely proud of the correction, of the man you're becoming now. Daniel nodded, his eyes focused on the plant before us. I used to think I had to give Lily everything I didn't have growing up, all the things we couldn't afford after Dad died. He looked up at me. But I had everything that mattered, didn't I? Security, truth, the knowledge that even when things were hard, you never lied to me about our situation. I tried to give you that, I agreed. Stability built on honesty, not the illusion of prosperity. That's what I want for Lily now, he said. Even if it means she has fewer toys than her friends, or doesn't go to the expensive summer camps Emily keeps pushing for. We finished planting in companionable silence, stepping back to admire the rose bush that would eventually climb the trellis beside my porch steps. Its blooms would greet visitors for years to come, a living testament to repair, to growth, to the patient work of rebuilding what had been damaged. Later, after Daniel had gone, I opened the envelope. Inside was not only the final payment, but a handwritten letter, 3 pages of reflection, apology, and commitment to our future relationship. I read it twice, tears blurring the words on the second reading, before placing it in my memory box alongside Lily's drawings and the program from the art exhibition. Some gestures were worth preserving. The coastal trip with Eli in July brought unexpected gifts. Long walks on windswept beaches, conversations that stretched into the night, laughter that healed places inside me I hadn't realized were still wounded. In the small seaside town, away from the familiar patterns of Maplewood, we discovered new dimensions to each, other and to ourselves. On our last evening, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, Eli took my hand, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the toy store," he said, "about whether I should sell it or keep going." The admission surprised me. He'd never mentioned dissatisfaction with his work before. "You're considering a change?" He nodded, gazing out at the horizon. "My uncle left me the store when he retired, and I've always felt obligated to maintain his legacy. But lately, I've been wondering if there might be something else I'm meant to do." He turned to me. "Being with you has reminded me how important it is to choose your own path, not just follow the one laid out for you." "What would you do instead?" I asked. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I've always wanted to work with troubled teens, maybe counseling or a youth program through the community center." He squeezed my hand. "Watching you reinvent yourself at 68 gave me the courage to consider it at 54. The revelation touched me deeply. The idea that my journey had inspired his own questioning, his own potential rebirth. "I think you'd be wonderful with young people," I told him. "You have a gift for seeing beneath the surface, for offering support without judgment." As we drove back to Maplewood the next day, I felt a sense of expansion, of possibilities stretching before us like the coastal highway. Not just for Eli and me as a couple, but for each of us individually. The understanding that growth doesn't end, that new chapters await at every age if we're brave enough to turn the page. August brought Emily's announcement that she'd accepted a job offer in Portland, close enough to maintain the custody arrangement, but far enough to necessitate adjustments. To everyone's surprise, she approached the situation with maturity, working with Daniel to create a schedule that prioritized Lily's stability. "I think the therapy is really helping her," Daniel observed after one particularly productive co-parenting discussion. "She's less defensive, more willing to compromise." Lily, now 8.5, adapted to the changes with remarkable resilience, treating the new arrangement as an adventure rather than a disruption. "Now I get to ride the Max train when I visit Mommy," she announced excitedly, referring to Portland's light rail system. "And she lives near a park with ducks." As summer faded into fall, my painting continued to evolve. I completed the plein air workshop in the Columbia Gorge, returning with a series of landscapes that captured not just the physical beauty of the river and cliffs, but the emotional resonance of those ancient formations. Endurance, transformation, the slow wearing away of sharp edges by persistent waters. Eleanor, now more mentor than teacher, encouraged me to submit work to a regional competition. "Your voice is ready to be heard more widely," she insisted. When one of my gorge paintings was accepted and subsequently awarded honorable mention, the validation felt like another threshold crossed, another door opening to a future I hadn't dared imagine for myself. In October, Eli sold the toy store to a young couple with innovative ideas for community engagement and educational programming. He began volunteer work at the teen center while pursuing certification in youth counseling, his enthusiasm for this new direction infectious. We celebrated with dinner at the nicest restaurant in Maplewood, where he presented me with another charm for my bracelet, this one a small tear. "Silver door, slightly ajar. For new beginnings," he explained, "and for the courage to walk through them." As the holidays approached once more, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From that moment in the toy store stockroom, heart pounding, disbelief mounting, to this place of peace and purpose I now inhabited. The path had not been straight or easy. There had been months of pain, confrontation, silence, and slow rebuilding. Relationships had been fractured, reformed, redefined. Yet standing in my kitchen on Christmas morning, watching Daniel and Lily bake cinnamon rolls while Eli set the table for breakfast, I felt a profound sense of rightness, of wholeness that had nothing to do with material security and everything to do with authentic connection. Later that day, as we gathered around my living room, the same space where painful truths had been revealed and difficult boundaries established, I looked at the faces of those I loved. Daniel, steady and present in ways he hadn't been in years. Lily, flourishing in the clearer air of honesty and appropriate expectations. Eli, whose intervention had set everything in motion and whose companionship now enriched my days. Even Emily, who had joined us briefly to exchange gifts, showed signs of genuine growth and self-awareness. After dinner, as twilight settled over Maplewood and Christmas lights twinkled in windows up and down the street, Daniel raised his glass. "To Mom," he said, his eyes meeting mine with genuine warmth. "Who taught me that sometimes? Protecting the people we love means stepping back. Not because we've given up on them, but because we believe they can rise on their own." The others echoed his toast, but I barely heard them through the sudden welling of emotion in my chest. For in that moment, I understood completely. This was what triumph looked like. Not revenge or vindication or material gain, but this, love purified by truth, relationships, strengthened by honest reckoning, dignity reclaimed through quiet courage. Later, in the peaceful solitude of late evening, I stood at my living room window watching snow begin to fall, gentle flakes illuminated by streetlights, transforming the ordinary neighborhood into something magical. Eli had gone home to care for his elderly cat, promising to return in the morning. Daniel and Lily were settled in the guest room, their soft voices drifting down the hallway as he read her a bedtime story. I touched the silver bracelet on my wrist, now bearing 3 charms: the palette, the door, and a heart Daniel had given me that morning. Symbols of art, opportunity, love, of a life reclaimed and reimagined. The woman who had stood in that toy store stockroom watching her son count out cash for collectibles while she pinched pennies for necessities, that woman would never have believed this future possible, would never have imagined the strength she possessed, the community she would build, the joy she would reclaim. But I knew better now. Knew that love isn't blind obedience or endless giving without boundaries. It's truth, respect, and the quiet strength to say, "No more, because I love you enough to let you fall, and am strong enough to help you rise again." As the snow continued to fall, coating my garden in pristine white, covering the peace rose now dormant until spring, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle closed, a lesson learned, a journey honored. The path forward stretched before me, unwritten and full of possibility, and I was ready to walk it, with clear eyes, an open heart, and the unshakable knowledge that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity, to demand truth, to begin again. Never too late to discover that your own steadfast light is enough to illuminate the way home.